everybody, and welcome back to the Adult and Pediatric Institute podcast. This is a podcast where we get messy, we get real, and we talk about real life stuff with limited filters. Today, I have a very, very special guest on the podcast, and I'm really excited for her to be on this podcast because she is all things knowledgeable about something that I am not knowledgeable about. And I feel like those are the best people to have on your podcast is people that you can really learn from. And what she teaches us today, I know is going to help a lot of my clients and our clients here at the Adult and Pediatric Institute, as well as I think a lot of our listeners. So, this is a really cool opportunity for some of you listeners to get some free professional information. And who doesn't love everything free? So, with us today is Miss Nancy Cavey, and she is with Cavey Law. She is a disability rights attorney, and hopefully I said that correctly. And she's been practicing a really long time. And so, just a plethora of information. I'm excited to bring her on. So, Nancy, thank you for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me. I look forward to this podcast.
Can we kind of start off with tell us a little bit about you, what type of attorney you are, and then how long you've been practicing for?
Okay. Well, I am a Social Security disability and ERISA disability attorney. I've been practicing for many years. My inspiration was my father. He was a World War II combat veteran from the Pacific. He was a naval aviator. And when I was in junior high school, he was diagnosed with having leukemia. I watched him make that very difficult decision to ultimately stop work and apply for not only his Social Security disability benefits, but his private disability insurance benefits. So I have watched this struggle and I watched what happened to our family. So my dad was a kind of a John Wayne type of guy. But when he got to the point where he realized that his health was more important and that he needed to spend what time he had with his family, then he made that decision, as I said, to apply for benefits. So that was my inspiration for becoming a Social Security disability attorney.
Wow, and that's especially difficult. We see a lot of veterans at our practice, and I'm a veteran myself, which you knew that, and we had kind of talked about your dad on your podcast. But I think it's especially difficult when you have these gender stereotype norms of males, and especially veteran males. It's rough and tough, and the military kind of beats into you. Don't ever show weakness and don't ever ask for help. And you should be able to handle all things and everything that's thrown at you. And we know that that's not realistic and that's garbage advice to give to anyone, but to come to terms with the fact that, okay, I need to ask for help and I need to ask for help from my government, who I've spent however many years of my life defending my government and working for my government. And now it's my turn to ask for help. I would imagine that that was probably pretty difficult for him to come to terms with and admit.
It was a difficult decision that he made, and it took almost 6 years for him to make that decision. And you're right. The ethos, if you will, of the military is to project a strong, confident soldier, regardless of their sex. But that can be a problem when you have a medical condition that impacts your ability to serve your country as a member of the military, or upon discharge, where you've developed medical conditions as a result of your service that can impact your ability to work. And the same holds true for us who have not served in the military. We don't like to show weakness or vulnerability. That's just the way our culture has sort of inoculated with this world. There are other cultures, which people that I've dealt with, who have that same issue. And what I have to tell everyone, regardless of your culture or your sex or those sorts of things, is that you need to be authentic to who you are and the values that make you who you are. And there's nothing wrong with recognizing that you have issues. You have vulnerability issues. You might have physical or mental issues. To me, that's the strength of being a genuine human being, is to accept the fact that you have challenges, may not be the challenges that you want, but then to move forward in a way that respects your dignity and the dignity of your family members.
Absolutely. And you brought up so many good points there. I have up in my office here, I'm looking at it right now. I have it framed on my wall. And it's Theodore Roosevelt's The Man in the Arena, his quote. And it's fairly short, but the first lines are, "It is not the critic who counts." Right?
Correct.
And the whole point of that speech that he gave is the real strength and the real power is not the person who's criticizing someone or the person who pretends like nothing is wrong. It's the person who isn't afraid to be vulnerable, who isn't afraid to fail and admit their failures and try to get help for their failures. That is where true bravery comes from. It's a lot easier to just pretend like nothing is wrong and everything's fine. I don't need help from anyone. To never have to be vulnerable or show anyone your weaknesses, kind of what you said of like we're indoctrinated in our mind born with don't show weakness. It's a cultural thing and a society thing. And I think we couldn't be any more wrong in that mindset that we can't show weakness. I think that's part of what leads us to a more detached society is that we don't want to be vulnerable with each other or show weaknesses.
And that's a discussion that I'll have a lot with my military clients who have come to me to seek Social Security disability benefits in addition to their VA disability benefits, or just a person who has worked hard all of their lives and their identity is so tied to their job or their role in their particular family. It can be a challenge to say that I can't be who I was or what I was, but to recognize that strength comes from recognizing that and then charting a path forward that's, best for you and your family. Obviously, it's a situation where people will grieve the loss of their identity, the loss of physical or cognitive, or psychological functioning, which is part of the process, I think. But when people come to me to help them get their Social Security disability benefits, I applaud the strength of their character for recognizing that they need help, and asking for help is not weakness. It's actually a sign of strength.
Yeah, absolutely. What does that process look like for these veterans or non-veterans, regardless if someone is saying, "Hey, I need help. I can't keep this job and I'm struggling to put food on my table and I'm struggling to pay my rent or pay my mortgage and I really need help." And let's say they call you. What does that timeline look like for Social Security disability? And does it help them to call you before they start filing anything themselves?
Okay, so let's unpack that. To be eligible for Social Security disability benefits, you have to, depending on your age, work 20 out of the last 40 quarters to become insured. So if you look at your paycheck, you'll see those FICAs. The FICA withholdings go toward your insured status. People do need to understand that when you stop work, you should be, in my opinion, immediately applying for Social Security disability benefits for
Okay.
several reasons. One of which is when you stop working, your contributions, those quarters of coverage will expire, and as a rule, that's about 5 years after you stop work. So I've had people who waited years before they apply, and the problem with that is that you can only go back a year from the date of your application. So you've sat there for 4 or 5 years, can only go back 1 year from the date of your application in terms of benefits, and you may very well have lost your insurance status. So when your doctor tells you to stop work or you can no longer work and you've got medical support, you should be applying for Social Security disability benefits.
To capture that 40 quarters. If they're looking at the last 40 quarters, you have to have worked them.
Yeah, so for example, if you stop today, you've got your insured status. Most likely, your insured status will end in 5 years. So you don't want to fool around. And the other reason you don't want to fool around is, and I don't mean to be political about this, but before Biden left office, the average wait time for an initial claim to be reviewed by the state examiner at DDS was about a year. That was in part because of the many years of the underfunding of the Social Security system and not having adequate staffing or compensation for staff.
Okay.
That was exacerbated by COVID. When Social Security went remote, a lot of people weren't used to working remotely. And then when we were coming out of COVID, what happened was there were employers who were offering higher wages with less demanding jobs. A lot of people, employees of Social Security, left, and they never really recovered the staffing numbers that they needed to adequately staff Social Security. That has been exacerbated with the 25% budget cuts enacted by the Trump administration. That has resulted in many staff members of SSA, including local offices, being let go. Here in the state of Florida, there is a hiring freeze. The DDS, who handles the initial claim and application, can't hire any new people because the Florida legislature hasn't appropriated the money. That's exacerbated the situation. So you have 25% of the Social Security office staff being terminated or resigned or whatever you want to call it. And there's no mechanism by which to hire replacements, even if that was mandated.
Yeah, even if they needed to, it's still essentially a hiring freeze.
So we're telling our clients it will take about a year and a half, maybe longer, to get your initial application reviewed. So this is like getting on a train. If you don't get on the train, you're not going to get to the station. So we urge people to get on the train. What's also important is that we use forms called residual functional capacity forms that we Social Security lawyers have developed. So when a client comes to us, we ask the client to go to their doctor with the appropriate residual functional capacity form that we give them and ask that the doctor fill out. Now, that doesn't work with the VA, even though the regs say that the doctors are to fill them out, they won't. But the point is that this residual functional capacity form will quantify a person's physical, cognitive, and psychological restrictions and explain why the person meets the 5-step sequential evaluation test used in every Social Security case. So the strategy here is that when we finally get a claims examiner assigned to the claim, our client has continued to treat, continued to give a really good interval history of their symptoms and functionality, and they've got that residual functional capacity form or forms that the claims examiner can look at and say, hey, I see why the person meets the 5-step sequential evaluation. I will award benefits.
Does it happen? Does it ever happen that easy?
Yeah, we have claims approved at the initial application stage because
Really?
of our aggressive use of residual functional capacity forms and
Good
case studies.
documentation.
Yeah. It comes down to
Wow.
a lot of documentation in the right form. The Social Security uses a 5-step sequential evaluation. So if I could quickly go through that, I think that will help.
Please. Absolutely.
So unlike the VA, which uses impairment ratings, Social Security doesn't care about impairment ratings, nor do they care about a note from your doctor that says you can't work. What they're looking for and ask are 5 questions. 1, have you been out of work for a year? Do you have a medical condition that would last at least a year? 2, is this condition temporary or permanent in nature? In other words, is it like a sprain or a strain that will recover quickly? At step 3, they have a big book called the Listing of Anatomic Impairments based on body systems. So, Nicole, you recall when we took high school biology, we learned about the cardiovascular system, the digestive system, the orthopedic system. Well, Social Security has a book, the book listing of impairments is based on body systems. You open it up, you look at the records, you compare the elements of the listing. And more often than not, people don't meet a listing at step 3 because doctors didn't go to medical school to learn how to write a report that addresses the elements of a listing. Now, that's
Mhm.
important because if you meet a listing, benefits are automatically awarded. But I'll tell you, 90% of cases, if not more, are decided at steps 4 and 5. 4 is, can you go back to the lightest job you held in the 5 years before you became disabled? But most cases are won and lost at step 5. And depending on your age, it becomes easier the older you are, over 50, and certainly over 60. But the test, if we're not using the grid test, is, hey, is there other work in the mythical, hypothetical, not real world national economy that you could hypothetically do, even though it doesn't pay a living wage or be anything you're interested in view of your age, education, skills, and restrictions? You have to prove basically that you can't even do a job sitting down all day using your hands, meeting the pace, production, and attendance requirements. Social Security will really say, hey, we think you could be a surveillance system monitor. We think you could sort nuts and bolts or pecans or peanuts. We think you could address envelopes all day. Okay.
Wow.
So, stupid jobs that really don't exist or exist in great numbers is how the Social Security evaluates ultimately a claim. And people need to keep that in mind, particularly when they're talking to their doctors and telling them the history of their symptoms and functionality. What is it about your medical condition that would prevent you from sitting? Or what would prevent you from using your hands? What would
I
prevent you
get
from meeting the pace and production requirements? And that's what you need to be talking about to your doctors.
That's really interesting. So have you been out of work for a year? So that's step
Or
1.
or a medical condition that would keep you out of work for a year.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it's the
Um,
or, okay?
okay. And then is this temporary? It's funny because some of these questions are very similar questions that they ask at the 504 meeting,
Yeah,
right? And so with the 504, same concept. It's derived from Section 504, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it kind of makes sense that a lot of these questions look the same.
correct.
Uh, so if someone were to say, yes, this is temporary, can they get Social Security disability for just that temporary time period, or does that kind of automatically rule them out from getting Social Security disability?
There's no temporary benefit, if you will, and the
Okay.
disability has to last at least a year. And so if it doesn't, the answer is no.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. The listing of impairments that you brought up, so the VA, you kind of talked about the VA. The VA system is very different for my veterans out there that are listening. And again, something that Nancy can also help you with. I had to navigate my disability ratings when I got out of the military. I did it on my own.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
all about silos, right? I
oh,
think I think of them
yeah.
as missile silos, okay? You
Yeah.
put one condition in this missile silo, you put another condition, you put TDIU,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
they're all
So, uh,
silos,
thankfully, something that I had mentioned to you before on your podcast, and this is kind of proof of concept. That here's your proof in the pudding. I'm kind of a data and information nerd
uh-huh,
and legal nerd. And so I pulled up the VA's schedule of disability ratings.
right?
And very similar, I would imagine how I'm interpreting what you said, this point, the third step, the listing of impairments of body
Right.
systems, where the
Mhm.
VA kind of has their own.
Right,
It breaks it down. You go to cardiovascular, and
right.
then you open this up, and now you're looking for blood pressure or something that would relate to blood pressure, and then you open that up, and then you're looking for
Yeah,
all
so
these subsections.
if you look at the VA listings, you can see what the criteria is, and so you wanna make sure that your medical records are documenting that criteria.
Yes,
And then when you
that
have a CMT
criteria.
exam, you need to make sure that you're telling the doctor your symptoms and functionality.
Yeah. It's important for people to be educated, and I've always told people, takes a certain level of ownership to whatever you're capable of taking to pull up this listing of impairments of body systems, or pull up the VA disability rating. Have a generalized idea so that when you're sitting down with someone like you, Nancy, where you're sitting down with you and they're talking about their disability, they at least have kind of a foundation. It's not so foreign to them.
Yeah, correct, because I think that people need to understand that their job, the best way they can help themselves is to be a truthful storyteller of their symptoms and functionality.
Yeah.
So, when you go into the doctor's office and they ask you how you're doing, you don't say fine. You tell them what your symptoms and functionality are. And if you have a doctor who's not particularly receptive to that, you bring in a list of your symptoms and functionality and you ask it to be made part of the chart. Does that make you appear to be wimpy or weak? And my response to that is hell no. You are being an advocate for yourself because clearly the doctor is not interested in being an advocate for you. So,
Well, hold on now. Let's just talk about which doctor that might be, because I'll tell you what, we love it when patients set appointments with us and they bring in any sort of log or any sort of records or any sort of diary, journal entries that they've been tracking their symptoms and here's what they've experienced. We love it when they do that because then we have something to go off of and we're like, okay, this is someone that we can have a real conversation with and we can kind of dig in because they've already done some of the legwork for us. They've already been tracking their symptoms and we know how to better help them. So I can say, as a provider's office, we love that. And especially if someone is coming to us because they need a psych eval for a disability claim. And I get where your comment came from because that is old medicine. That's how medicine and how it still is. And that's why we created the Adult and Pediatric Institute because it shouldn't be that way. I'm not going to know this person better than they know themselves. I don't care how good of a doctor Dr. P is, my partner. I don't care how good she is. And we tell this to clients all the time. No one knows you better than yourself. So who are we to not listen to the person sitting in front of us who is the expert in what they're saying?
I mean, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, at
It
least
doesn't happen.
my practice, that's physicians are so busy, they have so many patients to see, but I quite frankly, uh, don't necessarily like electronic medical records because you see the same thing over and over, and the
Oh, and
VA
they're clicking
is the
boxes.
worst example
Yeah.
of electronic records. Um, so you have to be an advocate for yourself
Yeah.
by telling the truthful story of your symptoms and functionality.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember for one of my CMP exams afterwards, when I was reviewing the record, the doctor had clicked the box that she had me do the duck walk. And I was like 10 days post-op when I had to do the CMP exam.
Well,
And I was livid. I filed a formal complaint. I filed all of the necessary paperwork with the VA disability office because I was 10 days post-op. It was physically impossible for me to have done a duck walk. Like it's
right.
impossible. I could not have done it. I was limited. I think I was still on a knee brace. Part of my formal complaint was this doctor clicked boxes because that's what she needed to do to close out this note.
Correct.
This could have seriously impacted the rest of my life and whether or not the VA would have continued to provide care for my knee injury. That's a big deal. This is a big deal to people. You know,
Absolutely.
this is impacting their life. Do your job, do it right, or stop doing it.
Correct.
Period. That's my opinion on it.
I
Like,
no, 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 I agree.
so can you go back to the lightest job you did? Is there other work that you could do with the changes in our political environment, we'll say? Does Social Security take into consideration whether or not that job is available?
So this is a mythical, hypothetical, not real world test. So if we get to a hearing at step 5, there is testimony about what's called significant numbers of the jobs, which has become a quite contentious part of a Social Security hearing. If any of your listeners are not represented at the hearing stage, they need to immediately run and go get an attorney because the ultimate decision on a case is really made based on the hypothetical that the judge gives based on the person's physical, cognitive, or psychiatric restrictions. That needs to be addressed. But then the VE testimony needs to be attacked on the basis that they are really acting as statisticians, not vocational counselors. And the numbers that they come up with seem to be sometimes pulled out of the sky. And so we always do a post hearing memo and we go back and check their numbers. Their numbers are not very accurate. So, again, a word of advice to any of the listeners who are at the hearing stage, they really should owe it to themselves to get a Social Security disability attorney.
Absolutely. Is these hearings, is it kind of like a criminal
So,
hearing
so
where there's
it's an
evidence that's
informal, yeah, it's an informal hearing. The same, you do swear an oath. The rules of evidence don't necessarily apply. But the other thing here is you got to know who your judge is because there are judges who have certain proclivities, certain views of people, have a certain history of denials. And You just have to know that walking in so that you can craft your case for the judge, much like you would be in school. You want to make sure you give the teacher what the teacher wants. But
Yeah.
ultimately, you might be trying the case to set it up for an appeal. So again, you've got to be cognizant of things like who's the judge, what's their approval rate, who's the vocational evaluator going to be, is there going to be a medical consultant testifying? So a person who walks into a hearing thinking that the judge is going to have their back is absolutely incorrect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that makes sense. And with the vocational evaluator, with those numbers that you were referencing, is that something that the person's going to get in advance before they
No.
hear?
Oh, no, no. This is not to use a military analogy. This is like the machine gun. And I'm writing down what the hypothetical is, formulating my cross-exam questions, listening to the answer at the same time. So I'm doing 3 things at once with no ability to check their numbers, which is why you've heard the word due process. It's in the news a lot these days. We have to object at the end. We have to object to the testimony and preserve our clients' rights to due process so that we have the right to respond to questionable vocational testimony. With all due respect, the average layperson just doesn't understand how to do that and preserve
Oh,
and protect their.
yeah, no, not at all. I'm sitting here thinking, even more reason to have someone like you that's done this before sitting next to them, knowing what to object to. So, how would someone go about getting you on their case? Is it hard to get a social security disability attorney to take someone's case? Is it easier? How does that work?
Yeah, so the National Organization of Social Security Claims Rep, NOSCAR, NOSSCR, has a directory and list of attorneys by state. So people can find an attorney in the location that they live in. I will tell you that I only take about 11.3% of the cases that people will call me up because we do a lot of heavy screening. There are just certain cases that I know are not winners from my perspective as a business owner and a person who has to make payroll. And there are cases that I know I'm looking for that I know I can win, or I'm looking for cases that I might not be able to win, but I think if I have a good client who can tell a truthful story and has the support of the doctors, then I will take that case. You need to be kind of wary, if you will, of a lawyer who will take anything and everything that walks in the door, because that tells you that it's a churn, it's a mill, and they're not necessarily going to take the time to and resources to devote to create a winning strategy. So I would start out with NOSCAR, make some phone calls, ask family members or friends. With all due respect to big board advertisers, that tells you something. So um,
Yeah, back in the day, I don't know if anyone still uses this terminology, and I might age myself with this terminology, but the ambulance chasers, it was
yeah,
like,
yeah, I think that's kind of the right word.
yeah. So yeah, let's get into like some of your personal history. What has it been like being a female in kind of this male dominated world as a female business owner? How have you been able to navigate that so successfully?
I guess I will date myself in this answer, but back when I graduated from law school, it was very difficult for a woman, a black or a Jew, to be hired by a law firm. I was asked during interviews, if I hire you, I'm taking a job away from a veteran. Or what are you going to do when you have children? Are you going to quit? So it was not necessarily a pleasant environment. I practiced workers' comp for many, many years, still do workers' comp. I was the 3rd woman workers' comp lawyer in the state of Florida. Now I think the swing is many more women lawyers compared to male. So um, sexual harassment, discrimination was part of it. I mean, I remember getting stopped in the middle of a closing argument by a judge saying, "Excuse me, Miss Cavey, are you dating? I have somebody I'd like to introduce you to," which was rather embarrassing in the middle of a closing argument. But
Yeah.
I think the circumstances have clearly changed over the years where women are accepted in the legal field. I think one of the best days I remember in my practice was the court reporter was a woman. The plaintiff's counsel was a woman. I was the defense counsel. I was a woman, and the doctor was a woman. And we all just sat around and looked at each other and said, "We've made it, baby." So,
Yeah, right?
yeah, yeah.
That glass ceiling was broken by these high heels.
Yeah, 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 right. So I think that society has become much more accepting of women professionals. Women have risen through the ranks of law firms to become partners. They've become respected jurists. I mean, we have women on the U.S. Supreme Court, but that isn't to say that there isn't a lot that still needs to change. But that's been my journey. I'm proud of that journey. My philosophy has always been, you're not going to tell me what I can't do. I will figure out what I can do. So don't tell me what I can't do. Tell me how I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I love that. And there's definitely still some disparities there and still some, gender pay equality is not there. It's not where we need it to be. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the military right now is a prime example of these particular issues. And the VA system is kind of rife with discrimination of all sorts. So there is systemic issues in certain institutions that certainly need to be challenged, and hopefully we can see change. Because ultimately, my philosophy, and I think the philosophy of many Americans, is that we all have a lot to contribute to our country, regardless of who we are, where we're from, how we were raised.
yeah. And ultimately being judged on the merit of your work
Correct.
and not on your gender, race, religion, or disability. Don't disqualify me because I'm a female. There are unique qualities that females can bring to the table that men can't. It's just not in their DNA. It just doesn't come along with that Y chromosome. And those differences are what we should be celebrating and empowering young women want to become a Supreme Court justice, or want to become an attorney, want to become a doctor, want to become whatever they want to become. Maybe they want to become a starving artist on the side of the road like my 12-year-old. Cool.
Yeah.
If that's what you want to become, I'm going to empower you to become it. So just really saying exactly what you said. Don't ever let someone else box you in or tell you what you can or cannot do. That's only for you to decide, not for someone else.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said that women should be where decisions are made. And I think that that really transcends not only gender, but different political affiliations, different racial or religious origins. We all should have a place at the table
Yeah.
because ultimately we want to have a say in what type of country we want and how particularly we treat the disabled. Because one of my other favorite sayings is a saying from Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the effect that the measure of a society is how it treats those who are disabled. And so I think that those two things should be our aspirational goals.
Yeah. I have hope for the upcoming generation. I think the upcoming generations, it's just the world is so, so different than what it's been for the last God knows how many years with the advances in technology and how they are being presented information and how they're retaining information. And it feels to me like they are a very passionate generation, that they aren't afraid to take a stand for a cause that they believe in and use their voice and try to make a difference.
I don't disagree with you, but I also think that we need to have a better understanding of history so that we aren't repeating the same mistakes. But more importantly, I hated this class, but now I appreciate it. And that is, I don't know if you remember the old civics class where you learned about the political process and how sausage was made. I think far too few people understand the principles of democracy,
Yes.
the lessons learned from our forefathers, and don't really understand how democracy works. That's, I think, in great measure a fault of our information system,
Yes.
where you get a lot of curated reality, if you will. So I would urge anyone who's listening to this to be an active a reader of history, be an active reader, period, because the perspective that you learn and experiences that you learn that others have had, I think, can help inform how you move through life, the sort of basic principles that you want to apply to your life at different stages of your life.
Yeah. Another one of my favorite sayings is the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know.
Correct.
And that's so true. When you're young, you know everything. Um, As
Yeah,
you
I think Mark Twain said he was really surprised at how much his father learned when he, Mark Twain, was between the ages 18 to 22.
Yeah,
In other words, his dad got a whole lot smarter as Twain grew up.
yeah, yeah, I love that because it's true. As you learn more and your eyes are kind of open to new things and new experiences and you see different things, you realize there's so little that you actually know. And then this desire to want to learn more hopefully comes in line with that, you know.
Yeah, I think one of the keys to all of this is to have a set of basic principles that one lives their lives by. And if you have basic principles, it really helps guide your actions and it gives you a foundation for making what appear to be complex decisions, but are really simple decisions based on those principles.
Yeah. This is what I know to be right. This is what I know to be wrong.
Right. That makes
And
everything easy after that. Is it right? Is it wrong?
yeah, yeah,
This is my course of action.
that's a great way of looking at it. I'm going to change trajectory here, but why are attorneys not called doctor? I've always wondered that. Why are we not saying Dr. Cavey?
Yeah, a Juris Doctorate. Well, I think part of this goes back to a different question, and that is if you look at the history of attorneys, counselors at law, the history goes back to England. But the thing I talk to my clients about is yeah, we're attorneys at law, but you also forget we're counselors at law. And that means, in my opinion, that you need to do education. You need to explain to your clients, much like I explained here, the 5 step sequential evaluation and what it is you need to prove.
Nope.
And so after you've explained the law, then you are counseling them on the course of action that may be appropriate. And there could be more than one, but you give a person as a counselor a framework in which to make a decision consistent with the law or consistent with their principles. So I'm redirecting that question and reframing it to having lawyers be not only attorneys at law, but counselors at law. And the other thing, quite frankly, is we're officers of the court. And I have to remind my colleagues that we owe a duty to the Constitution and we owe a duty to the court as officers of the law. In my view, the way I was taught, if there's a choice between being an officer of the court and lying or misrepresenting or being an overzealous advocate, I will always default to being an officer of the court because I've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and the sanctity of the judicial system.
Wow, that's really powerful. Those were really powerful words. And I wish more people in your position said them. We'll say that and abide
Yeah.
by that. When I got out of the military, I remember I was sitting in one of my undergrad classes and we were talking about military and everyone had known that I was a veteran. And I did 3 tours in
Ooh,
Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom.
wow.
And
Thank
yeah, one of my fellow classmates made a pretty awful comment to me. I'm not going to say what the comment was, but made it in front of the whole class. And essentially it was pretty in tune with the type of comments that Vietnam veterans were getting when they got out of the military.
Mhm.
And everyone in the class around me immediately jumped on him and went there to defend me. And thankfully, I served in the military at a time where I came home a hero, right? My fellow Vietnam brothers and sisters did not get that, unfortunately. But so they jumped in to defend me and they all kind of looked at me and they're like, "Are you not going to say anything?" And I remember this like it was yesterday. My comment was, I served in the military to protect the right to freedom of speech.
Correct.
And that's not just the freedom of the speech that I agree with.
Correct.
And if I were to attack him right now for having his opinion, that's contradicting all of those years that I spent serving our country. And that's not
Correct.
what I'm for. He has the right to be an idiot.
Right.
It's
That's right. That's
how I
right.
said it. You know, like he has the right to be an idiot and have an opinion that I really disagree with. And who am I to tell him otherwise? That's his right. And that's why I served.
And that's fantastic. I wish that people really understood when you are sworn into the bar, sworn into the military, that you take an oath, and that oath is not necessarily for you. It's for the benefit of the country and the principles on which this country was founded. And so, again, that's a form of a guide. Founding principles should be your principles that you apply throughout your life and give you an answer to whatever the dilemma is. And you handled it beautifully because
Thank you.
you served to protect his constitutional right of free speech, and for you to attack him for exercising the very right that you defended would have been not only a violation of your oath, but hypocritical. And so that's a great example of you taking the oath that you swore to and applying it to to your life in civilian life.
Absolutely.
So again, congratulations to you. I think you handled it beautifully.
Thank.
And I think that story is certainly a guide to all of your listeners.
Yeah, I hope so. You know, it doesn't make it any less hard. And obviously, you know, in my head, I was saying other things, but that
Yep.
doesn't mean it came out of my mouth.
Right, right, right. Well, I'm used to that being in court. Saying one thing, thinking another.
Yeah, exactly. With the attorneys and what you said, where it sort of got created back in the day. Hey, at least you don't have to wear the wigs anymore, right? Don't
Well,
they?
we never had to wear the wigs or the robes.
Didn't
Um,
they? Don't they still wear those over in Europe?
well, I was just in Canada speaking at a lawyers gathering, and my colleagues in Canada wear the robes. I don't think they wear the wig, but my colleagues in the UK do wear both the wigs and the robe. It is the legal profession's uniform, if you will. It's the judge here in the US that wears
The rope.
the robe, the idea being that the robe represents neutrality and equality, and the judge is embracing that by wearing black robe. When we go into court, most judges do have a clothing guide. The judges get upset if you wear like bright colors. So, you know, when I go to court, it's a blue suit, a black suit, a brown suit, a gray suit, because my job is not to draw attention to myself. My job is to serve in my capacity as a lawyer and be an advocate for my client.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I like the robe.
So if you ever put a robe on, it's hot and heavy. So
Like, yes,
so
I would.
oh, yes. So some of my friends who are judges would actually wear shorts underneath the robe because
That's
it was so
great.
hot. Yeah, so
I love that. That's like the white coat. You know, the white coats have come a long way. They used to be so stiff and
yeah.
uncomfortable, and you could barely move in them. And it's white. Who picked white? This is a horrible idea. You're around blood and body fluids.
Yep.
How would you pick
Yeah.
white? That's like my dress whites in the Navy. We all carried Tide sticks with us where we went because it was like things were just going to attract to you. Like you could not be touching anything, and you were going to somehow end up dirty.
I
So.
got that.
But all right, so to wrap this up, you know, one of the questions that I really like to ask everyone that comes onto the podcast is if you could give your younger self one or two pieces of advice, what would that be?
I think I've talked at great length about principles. I think that it's really important for a person to sit down and think about the principles that will guide their lives. And you're going to encounter, and I've encountered a lot of situations that, you know, life isn't a straight road, it's a zigzag. Even in the simplest decisions, those principles have guided me in making a decision or take a course of actions. You can control your life and should control your life, and you should not let others make decisions for you, but you should have basic principles that allow you to take the path, and it may be the path of most resistance as opposed to least resistance, but
I think it
um,
often is.
yeah. I mean, having a vision, a vision that will grow and change as the stages of your life as you move through those, I think is inevitable, but having basic principles as a guide to help you achieve that vision are crucial.
Yeah. Oh, good advice. I like that advice. So, Nancy, tell people how they can get a hold of you.
We are based in St. Petersburg, Florida, with offices in Tampa. I have a podcast called Winning Isn't Easy, both for Social Security and long-term disability. It comes out weekly. And if you go to YouTube, you will see thousands of videos where I am talking about some topic that I'm interested in to educate my clients. So there's lots of ways you can find me, see me, listen to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here today and sharing all this great information and insight. I hope that someone out there listening, you inspired them to maybe follow in similar footsteps and be a change agent for the legal industry.
Well, thank you for having me. Your story is inspirational, and what you do with your podcast, I think, is not only valuable, but it gives people a voice and let them know that there are people who, like you, who hear them and who respect them and want to help them and help them help themselves.
Thank you to all of our listeners out there who listened into this podcast. Nancy Cavey is an amazing woman. If you are in need of an amazing person by your side to help with your Social Security disability claim, you can reach her office at 727-894-3188 or go to caveylaw.com. That's CAVEY law.com. Thank you everyone again for listening. Go out and conquer your day.